Marcus Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this important debate. And this is an important debate, and I was therefore thought that it was a real pity, Madam Deputy Speaker, how this debate started and the tone that was set by the opposition front bench. In a very selective manner, the Shadow Secretary of State almost ran through things at times like he'd been in a time machine, missing out certain periods and certain significant challenges that this country has been through. There was no acknowledgement from the right honourable gentleman about the situation that his party left the public finances in 2010, a deficit running at £150 billion a year, £1 in every 4 that was being spent by the government actually being borrowed, and the taxpayer therefore footing the bill for that. A situation at the time where unemployment was still rising, where employment was going down and people were still losing their jobs. And therefore something had got to be done about that. The ship had got to be steadied, and clearly we've seen the result of that. We've got record employment now, record low unemployment, and rising wages. But to achieve that, there's had to be a lot of very difficult decisions. And I, for one, know how hard local government has worked, and the sacrifices that local government has made, and the sacrifices that people have made. And I do pay tribute to councillors across the country, particularly those Conservative councillors who run better run authorities at a lower cost. But I also thank those council officers who across the country have worked extremely hard to deal with the challenges we've had. And they've made a massive contribution to that deficit, as I've said. And I'm concerned that we've taken this debate in the context of a very much one-sided situation so far. Clearly, the right honourable gentleman on the opposition front bench has talked about the reduction in revenue support grant and the direct money from government. Now, that's certainly been the case. But he hasn't mentioned the other side of the equation, which has been business rate retention and council tax. And he hasn't mentioned the true picture, or he very much tried to distort the picture in relation to the funding that individual local authorities have got. Because when you actually look at the spending power per authority, it's the actual authorities that the right honourable gentleman was trying to say are worse off that actually have the highest spending power. That is the reality of the situation. Now, in saying what I'm saying, I'm setting the context of the approach that the opposition has taken. But what I want to do, and what I thought the opposition should have done in this debate, was look at the challenges and actually look at how we might go about, in a sensible and measured way, addressing some of those challenges. Because I'm absolutely certain, in my mind, that we do need to put more money into local government, and this government is starting to do that. Spending power is on the increase, and the funding for social care since 2017, up to £10 billion has been made available to local authorities to fund social care. Now, if you look at the opposition's motion, that mentions £8 billion being put in this Parliament to social care. Actually, the current government is already putting in more than that. But there are significant pressures on social care. Whether you look at children's social care, where there are more looked after children, whether you look at adult social care, where we have an ageing population, which is a great thing, but we have to support more people in their later years, or when you look at the very important group of people who require social care that are of working age, people like adults with learning disabilities, for example, and people with complex needs that need support. These are all groups of people that are growing in size, and we need to make sure that they are looked after for the future. And there are challenges on services as well in terms of not just demand, but also rising costs. The national living wage is going up, and companies are having to now pay additional pension costs to employees. And I think that is a really important and a good thing, because what we're now seeing is additional money being paid to the people that are doing an extremely important and difficult job of supporting the most vulnerable, and we need to make sure they're paid more, we need to make sure they're trained well, we need to make sure that it's more professional. So I do welcome those things, but these are all challenges that we face, and we need to work out in a very sensible and measured way how we are going to pay for this additional provision that is constantly being required and will continue to be required. And I thought it was a bit rich of the right honourable gentleman on the opposition front bench who talked about the 2010 general election and the Labour plans for social care being blown out of the water by the Conservatives at the time. I thought that was very rich, because that's exactly what the Labour Party did at the 2017 general election to the Conservatives. So if we are going to have a debate, let's have a sensible, measured and proper debate. And we've got to have this debate in the context of not just talking about how high our pile of cash is, and at the other side then saying we'll create a bigger pile of cash to pay for social care. We've got to acknowledge who's going to pay for social care, and we've got to get the balance right, because we can't expect to go to young people who've just gone into the labour market, just started work, trying to make their way in life. We can't expect them to pick up all of the tab. We can't expect older people who've worked all of their lives and built up assets to lose all those assets as a result of needing care. So we've got to look at these things very carefully and in the context of making sure that there is a balance, and we look at it proportionately, and we make sure that we provide the support that people need, but also make sure that people are rewarded for doing the right thing. And we also then need to look at social care, and clearly much of social care is provided through local authorities, but we also need to look at how that fits in with other social care provision. For example, continuing health care, I always find, is a real bone of contention. It's a very opaque system. It's hard for relatives to navigate. It's hard for them to figure out why their relatives not eligible when somebody else in a neighbouring bed, for example, has been eligible. And it can quite often take forever for a claim to go through. I've known a number of cases where, unfortunately, relatives have passed away for some period before a continuing healthcare claim is settled. Yes, I will, goodbye.
Important point for anybody who's dealt with families experiencing the continuing health care reviews that go through, and then suddenly the money is withdrawn, and very often that elderly person then is transferred to another home because they can't afford the one they're in. Isn't this something really, in advance of a fundamental reform to social care, we just need to address this issue and get it sorted out? It's a really important problem.
The honourable gentleman knows a great deal about this subject, and certainly in the context of what he's talking about, I certainly think that issue needs looking at, as does the wider system and how it works. And we also, Madam Deputy Speaker, need to look at how social care works in the context of the wider health system. We need integration, and we've all talked about integration for years, and integration does happen, but we need a system that is simple enough for people, particularly in terms of relatives, a system that people can understand and can navigate. And we need to make sure that the different parts of the system are working together. So we need to make sure that public health is working with primary care. We need to make sure that our GPs are working well with our acute sector, and we're all working together with one common purpose, which is to keep people out of hospital for longer, because that's the way, one, people will have a better quality of life, but two, will also reduce the cost to the taxpayer. Now, I just want to mention a very small but important example, actually, in my own constituency, and it's a doctor's surgery called Whitestone Surgery. I must declare an interest there because I'm actually a patient of the surgery. But the reason I want to mention it is because they're doing fantastic work through their patient participation group and social prescribing. And there are many of the patients who go into that surgery, and it's relatively an older cohort of people in that particular catchment. Many of those people who go into that surgery are then passported through to the PPG, who have then a number of streams of activity, including an allotment, including going out on days out, going down the pub on the odd lunchtime for a meal, and all those sorts of things, which are really improving the situation in the area in terms of reducing social isolation and loneliness. And this surgery, as a result of this work that is going on, is actually seen a significantly lower amount of antidepressants being prescribed and less people being diagnosed with dementia than other surgeries with a similar cohort of patients. And this situation is being considered very carefully by Warwickshire County Council in terms of expanding it out across Warwickshire, but studies are also being undertaken to see what merit this has in a wider sense, and I'm absolutely delighted that in my area this important work is taking place, and it's a good example of what we need to be doing to support people. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, I want to make the point that local government has done its bit. It is doing its bit for our deficit. It is a situation where we need to support local government going forward. There are other services, such as the police, such as schools, where we need to put more funding into them. Now we've got the public finances far more under control. But we also need to think about how funding is distributed. At the moment, the fairness is not there. The people of Warwickshire, for example, get a raw deal compared to the people in many metropolitan areas. And we also need to think about the context of putting more money into public services and the effect that that has on our public finances, the effect to the taxpayer in terms of what people need to pay in terms of tax. And I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when I consider those things, this motion does not address the whole picture. It is based purely on a political slant that is not there to support the people that we all want to support across this chamber. I'm afraid it's there just to score a few points. I won't therefore be supporting this tonight.